A great conference. Today, I'm super excited to be talking with Will MacAskill. Will is a co-founder and senior research fellow at Forethought, where he works on preparing for very rapid AI-driven technological development. He's also authored a handful of fantastic books, Doing Good Better, Moral Uncertainty, and What We Owe the Future. And he's co-founded several key organizations within the Effective Altruism movement, including Giving What We Can, 80,000 Hours, and the Center for Effective Altruism. Welcome, Will.
It's great to be here. I'm really happy to be part of EA Connect.
Cool. So this is just going to be a pretty casual fireside chat. I have some questions prepared that I'd be keen to ask Will. We're going to talk a bit about the origins of EA and touch on some of Will's recent work as well. But there will also be a chance to ask questions for the audience. So those will be in Swapcard if you just click on the questions feature, and you should be able to submit questions there and upvote the questions that you want to see answered. So to get started with, Will, I know many people who are attending this event are pretty new to EA ideas. One of them is actually my mother, who I believe is currently watching. So I sometimes find it pretty difficult to explain this community that I'm involved in. So I'm curious how you would explain EA to my mom and people like her.
Well, hello, Mrs. Peters. I'm really happy that you're here attending. So effective altruism is about trying to do as much good as you can with at least a share of your time or your money. So that, with respect to your money, that could mean really trying to figure out what are the organizations that do the most to improve the world with every pound or dollar they receive in donations, and then giving a share of your income to those organizations. Or with your time, that could mean really thinking about, okay, what are all the career paths that I could pursue? What are the ones where, given my experiences and skills and expertise, I could contribute the most to making the world a better place, and then pursuing those careers. And then the effective altruism movement as a whole is the collection of people who take these ideas really seriously and who benefit from the kind of shared sense of community as well as the kind of network benefits and social life that brings too.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks, Will. So yeah, I believe back in 2011, you were part of the group of people who kind of initially coined this term effective altruism. Could you maybe tell us a little bit about what it was like in those early days and also like how this term came about?
Sure. So from my perspective, kind of the strand of thought and action that became part of effective altruism really began in 2009, where I met Toby Ord and was very inspired by the thinking that he had done for the few years prior to meeting me. And we co-founded Giving What We Can at the end of 2009, which was encouraging people to give at least 10% of their income to whatever charities were most effective, with a focus on extreme poverty and improving global health and development, and with a list of kind of recommended charities there too. And over the course of the next couple of years after that, it became clear to me, at least, that the ideas were a little bit broader than that, and that there was some like natural class of people that were really kind of engaged with this, willing to kind of really dedicate a big fraction of their lives to these ideas in a way that like most people really didn't think about. Normally the thought was like, oh, you have to like kind of use these like psychological tricks to get people to donate kind of £2 a month or something. You can't use arguments. Instead, it's going to be appeal to emotion. And then there's just this class of people who are like, no, I just take the arguments really seriously. And like, yeah, I'm willing to switch my career or donate 10%. And so was like, I was really pushing for the thought that like, yeah, there's this natural class of people. And we ended up having setting up an organization that's now called the Center for Effective Altruism, in order to be like, look, this is the kind of umbrella organization. And at that point, it was like, okay, we really need to have some sort of name. And yeah, many ideas were suggested, effective altruism, rational altruism, and so on. And we ended up just like having a vote among people to
Mm.
decide among these. And I'm very happy that effective altruism won out.
Nice. Yeah. Are there any particular names that you're glad didn't win out?
That's certainly the case. So early on, I was pushing for the word Benetarian, which would mean like follower of the good. This was back
Mm.
like 2009 times, because even then I thought like giving what we can could potentially become a movement. But then we started using the term super hardcore do-gooder for people that you might now call an effective altruist, and that we all agreed that needed to change.
Yeah, yeah. I'm super glad that I don't work at the Center for Super Hard Do-Gooders. Cool. Yeah. So you mentioned Toby Ord, who's also going to be giving a fireside chat. And later today, we're also going to be hearing from Peter Singer. So his writing was like my introduction to effective altruism thinking. And I believe his work was also quite formative for you. So I'm curious, like, could you tell us a little bit about this like intellectual journey and like, yeah, what led you to take these ideas seriously enough to kind of build your life and career around them?
Yeah, I mean, so for me, the early stages were really when I was a teenager and started coming across certain philosophical ideas. I think in Practical Ethics, the philosophy book by Peter Singer, he has this uh, line that about how at the time I think 45 million people had died from HIV/AIDS. And I remember just reading that and just thinking like, wow, that is just so messed up. Why is not everyone in the world talking about this right now? And I was just like, shocked, and it was like confusing to me. Similarly, the arguments for vegetarianism, like that was maybe, yeah, took a little longer
Mm.
for me to get convinced. But again, I did. And the social scene I was part of was not maybe very receptive to these ideas. So I became a secret vegetarian for a little while um, before coming out when I left home. And then when I was at university, in particular, Peter Singer's argument in Fab and Affluence and Morality that
Mm,
failing to donate to save the life of a child in a poor country is just no different, morally speaking, than walking past someone who's drowning right in front of you. And I found that argument extremely compelling. And when I'd graduated, I was working as a fundraiser for a Care International development charity. And it just meant that all day, every day, I was talking about this argument. And it
mm,
really felt this intense kind of pressure that I was not living my life in accordance with what my values were. And
mm,
so when went to Oxford, I had this kind of moral energy and was really kind of searching for like, who are people taking some of these ideas seriously? What can we do? And so I was very lucky that Toby Ord was a graduate student there and we got put in contact.
yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, I'm super glad that you met Toby. Yeah, so I think it's interesting when we talk about these like arguments that we find pretty compelling. But often, like for many people, there's this gap where between finding an argument compelling and actually like acting on it. Like, how do you think about that difference in that gap, like especially as it applies to kind of EA ideas?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's extremely common. So prior to 2009, Peter Singer had been making these arguments for decades. Famine, Affluence, and Morality came out in 1972, I think. And it was just, utterly accepted within moral philosophy that certainly a large fraction, maybe even the majority of moral philosophers thought the arguments were just right and compelling,
Mm,
and yet almost no one acted on them at all.
mm,
Um, I actually remember being like talking with other friends and even being quite upset that like Peter Singer was donating, I think, about 40% of his income at the time. But I was like, why is he not giving more? Like, um, uh, and so actually maybe the kind of the most distinctive thing about effective altruism at that time was that suddenly it was a group of people who had just really were taking the argument seriously and willing to follow through.
mhm,
Where now we find it fairly like normal that people might be giving 50% of their income or choosing a
mm,
career on the basis of what will have the most impact. But at the
mm.
time, those were like totally wild ideas.
Yeah.
Um, and so what changed, I think the big thing is just social normalcy. Like
Mm,
humans in general find it very hard, including myself, very hard to do things that other humans around them aren't doing. And
mm,
so once you've got a community of people who are acting in a way that, like, yeah, of course, you'd act so as to do more good in your life, then for the people who like wanted to do that anyway, are like, oh, cool,
yeah.
I have permission to do it, essentially.
Yeah. 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 I think that's really true and has been my experience of the community as well. Um, so yeah, one thing I find interesting when kind of diving a bit deeper into EADs is like obviously we've got this idea of we're trying to have this massive impact, but there's so many issues that we could choose from. You know, like this weekend we've had talks about animal welfare, global poverty, pandemics, AI risk, like across a whole range of issues. And I know you've personally done a bunch of research related to prioritizing between different causes, but obviously most people aren't moral philosophers like yourself.
Yeah.
So for somebody, let's say, like watching this right now, how do they actually go about trying to decide what issues to work on?
Yeah, so there's a kind of slightly more theoretical and slightly more practical answers to that. So, the more theoretical, at least as heuristics, is to look at what are the problems that are largest in scale. So, how many people, or at least how many sentient beings, are affected, and by how much are they affected, whether for good or ill by the problem. A second is like how neglected it is. So, other things being equal, if a problem has less attention devoted to it, then you can have more of an impact. There's more low-hanging fruit to pluck. And then also just more tractable. So some problems are intrinsically easier to solve than others. And so other things equal, work on those that are easier to solve. So that's a kind of theoretical argument. Um, the more kind of practical argument is like, well, loads of people have done a lot of thinking on this. And so you can look up the kind of relevant effective altruism organizations. And, people don't all agree because this is like very hard set of questions.
Mm,
So you can, reasonable people can come to very reasonable, differences of an opinion. But you can look up organizations like 80,000 hours, Giving What We Can, what is now called coefficient giving, The Life You Can Save too. And you can see, and the Effective Altruism Forum for kind of ongoing discussion. And you can see the different kind of cause areas and organizations that people have tended to focus on,
mhm,
where so far that has tended to be global health and development, farm animal welfare, uh, increasingly kind of welfare of animals in the wild too, uh, reduction of the risk from worst case pandemics, reduction of risks from loss of control to AI systems, and then some things I'm particularly focused on, which is around steering the transition to a post-AGI society as well as possible.
mm, mm. Yeah, yeah, and definitely like keen to dive into that in a bit. But on this idea of trying to decide where to allocate your time and resources, I'm curious for you. You kind of began your career in academia, have written a couple of books. You've also spent time running organizations yourself, organizations like Giving What We Can. How have you kind of thought about your own career impact, and how has that changed over time?
Yeah, so I think yeah, maybe I'll say there's like three different phases or something. Like the first is like just trying to figure things out, and that's like I mean, it's interesting. I actually uncovered my own diaries from when I was kind
Mm,
of, I think actually the most interesting was when I was like 20, 21, and I was really wrestling with these ideas. And this was before I met Toby. And so I was considering earning to give. Um, but from my perspective, that would have involved applying, in fact, I did apply to work at investment banks and things.
mhm, mhm.
Even though it's like I had no interest in banking, I had like hopefully no skill at it either. And so I was really wrestling with just like, what am I in fact capable of doing and
Mm,
how much sacrifice am I willing to make and so on. And then over the years that followed, became more and more willing to kind of make, do things that were hard, basically, and kind of push myself in various ways. And people often feel a bit shocked by that or something. I
mhm,
think we have this idea of like, no, you should just always be following your passion and so on. And then people have this naive conception of that, where that means like, do what you're most excited about now. Whereas I, feel extremely happy that I've done many kind of hard things in my life. I think that has brought me like, even just from a personal perspective, a lot more meaning because I
Mm,
think I wouldn't have helped to get the ball rolling on effective altruism. Like when I helped set up Giving What We Can, I thought I was like throwing away my academic career and doing so because I was spending most of my time setting up organizations rather than doing academic research and
mm,
felt
mm.
quite torn up by that. But it turns out that like actually you just like try and do the right thing and then like other people, you can have like outside success from doing that. I think I should say in the last couple of years, I now, like over time, but last couple of years in particular, I've placed more and more weight on my personal, what I see is like my personal kind of comparative advantage and skills and so on.
Mm,
And a couple of reasons for that. And so this is kind of the more refined version of like following your passion,
mm,
doing
mm,
things that like you can have really sustained motivation over time. And a couple of reasons for that. One is just the community is so much bigger now that if you're going to do something that you're not actually that good at, but like think is important, probably there's just someone else who can do it better than you.
mm,
And then a second is just like when you're trying to have impact over the course of decades, like it's really a marathon, not a sprint, and you get like a lot of additional benefit from being able to focus on the thing that you have like intrinsic motivation to do kind of day after day. And that, in significant part, like my work on Forethought, why did I decide to do that? And other
mm,
things was because of that.
mm,
And
mm,
I feel, yeah, really quite good about that decision too.
mhm, mhm. Yeah. Yeah, speaking of these kinds of decisions, I know, yeah, obviously, I mentioned that you've written a few books. Somebody in Swapcard is keen to know any chance of a new book. What might it be about if you were going to write something?
It's a great question. Currently not planning any books. A couple of reasons for that. One is just, I'm working on AI related issues and things change so quickly
Mm,
that if you write a book, so like writing a book, it takes many years. Then from the period where you've like basically locked up the content to, okay, now you're doing editing and so on, that can easily be 6 months or even 12 months. It's just it alone. And then to publication, that's normally another 9 months or 12 months. So
yeah.
there's a real risk that you end up publishing something that's just totally out of date. It also just means you spend a lot of time on stuff that's just not that important. Um, like even looking back at what we are the future, we spent years of person's worth of time on the footnotes and maybe like I'm happy that it's so rigorous, but maybe that wasn't the optimal use of time, versus just like getting out more ideas. And then the final thing, actually, honestly, is just the non-fiction publishing world is just shrinking and shrinking. So
Mm, mm,
um, the way people are consuming ideas is just really moving away from books and onto things like podcasts, Substack, Twitter, and so on. So I have wondered about it, especially I have wondered like, could me and an AI mean like you can really pump something quite quickly?
yeah.
Um, but I think if you want to know the sorts of things that I would be writing on, you can read some of the articles and essays I've been publishing, like Preparing for the Intelligence Explosion or uh, the Better Future series. And so it's kind of like I'm writing books, but you can get them faster than you would have otherwise been able to, and you don't have to pay.
Yeah, that's a great deal. Speaking of Substack, I'd be curious to know who are you reading at the moment? Any Substackers you're a particularly big fan of?
Okay, again, great questions. So it's hard not to immediately shout out Bentham's Bulldog, who certainly wins by volume. Like I get my every day I get some new extremely long post for him. But I'm yeah, also a big fan of the content as well, quality as well as quantity. And I particularly like that because it's someone, this young prodigy who's taking philosophy just very, very seriously in
Mm,
a way that's like both speaks to me and is quite refreshing. So it's definitely that. On the AI side of things, Epoch, I mean, basically any report or newsletter they put out, I will normally read because their analysis is just so careful and so thoughtful and so in depth. Um, Similarly, when I want an overview, Transformer, the newsletter, is like the best overview I know of for AI related news. And then in terms of just where's the most interesting ideas coming from, I'd say like the Redwood Research
mm,
blog,
mm, mm.
where yeah, the quality of thinkers they've got there is just extremely high.
Yeah, yeah. Awesome. Well, yeah, definitely some stuff to check out for our audience. Um, so obviously these recommendations pretty AI heavy, and I know you're working on AI issues right now with Forethought. But given that kind of the origins in the origins of the EA community were really focused around things like anti-malarial bed nets, people are sometimes surprised to come to the EA community and find out that AI related issues are such a big focus right now. Could you maybe kind of just walk us through the basic case for prioritizing these issues?
Sure. I mean, the most basic case is the thought that, firstly, the point of time where we get um, AGI in particular, that is like AI that can replace humans at all cognitively, like economically useful cognitive tasks at lower cost than humans, that that is plausibly among the very most important moments in all of human history. Premise one. And the second premise, that may well like happen in the next 10 years. In fact, is maybe more likely than not to happen in the next 10 years.
Mhm,
And so then that's like really not going via any elaborate philosophical arguments. Um, Instead, it's just like, well, if there is going to be this enormous transition, surely we want to focus on making it go better rather than worse. Now, why might you think that this is among the most important developments ever? The key thing, in my view, is the way in which it would accelerate technological development, including development of greater AI capabilities. So
mhm,
you can see the scientific and industrial revolutions, like why did they come about? And I think it's because um, simply more people were trying to innovate, where that was both because the population was larger, um, but also because there was like competition among different European countries or city-states. And then finally, just because a lot, like for cultural reasons, a larger fraction of um, the populace went towards kind of innovation. And that just had this truly enormous, like absolutely revolutionary impact on the
mhm,
world. Like
mhm,
maybe to date, that was the most important thing in human history. And then with AI, well, take all of the people doing innovation at the moment, all doing science and engineering. That number, that maybe that's like tens of millions of people. That number grows at about 4% per year. It's not very much. At the point of time at which AI will do a comparable amount of labor as all human innovators is going to be not very long at all.
mhm,
Maybe that's
mhm.
about a year or something. Before that point, it'll be much less. After that point, it'll be much more because the total amount of like artificial intellectual horsepower is increasing by something like 25 times per year. Uh, and that, I think there are good arguments for thinking will radically speed up all of technological development or like large swathes of technological development, including development in AI capabilities in this kind of
Mhm,
tight
mhm,
feedback loop that then speeds up things faster. And so the analogy I've often been using is this idea of a century of technological development occurring in a decade, or even
mhm,
occurring in just a few years, actually. And
mhm.
so think of all of the challenges that you might expect to happen between now and the year 2125, and imagine all of them happening over the course of just a few years. Okay, that's going to be really quite huge,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
we should be prepared.
yeah, yeah. Certainly. Um, so yeah, there's this kind of discussion in the AI risk community, people who are interested in kind of like artificial general intelligence about timelines. And this is often like a core kind of point of disagreement. Um, I'm curious, maybe you can say a bit about like your views here on timelines and as well as like where those views are coming from and how you're forming them.
Sure. So, yeah, the timelines question, the best statement of it, in my view, is at what is when is the date at which we have AI that is essentially a drop-in replacement for an AI researcher, like an employee of OpenAI or Anthropic? That's the crucial date because I think that's the point in time at which you can you maybe get much faster speed up of AI capabilities, and therefore a lot of the other capabilities come soon afterwards. And when is that date? Uh, my take is that the single best argument you can make involves looking at this graph of AI capabilities, mainly in kind of software and ML, that comes from Meter, which is taking all sorts of tasks and then looking at how long does it take humans to do those tasks, like expert humans to do those tasks, and then looking uh, at what task horizon length can the best AI models do that task at 50% accuracy. So they get it done 50% of the time. And at the moment, I think the best models are a little under 3 hours.
Mm.
That hasn't yet tested Gemini 3 or Claude 4.5 Opus. So maybe we're going to hit, I guess, yeah, if I had to guess, I'd say we'll hit like 3 hours or just over 3 hours at the moment with those. Uh, However, this is this remarkably stable trend of exponential improvements in the task horizon length. And so the thought is you can say, well, at what point will that amount to drop in replacement for an AI researcher? And if you think, well, that's going to kind of hit at about the time of a task horizon length of, um, a week or a month, then you're looking at kind of like early 2030s for when we'll get to AGI or this kind of drop in replacement. And there are ways in which you could argue that's too pessimistic, as in that timelines will be shorter than that,
Mm,
in
mm,
particular because you start getting significant, before the point at which you've got a drop in replacement for an AI researcher, you've got AI that can't do all things that an AI researcher does, but is enough to double their productivity, 10x their productivity, and so on.
mm,
And so that actually brings things earlier. Arguments for thinking later is that in order to keep this exponential trend growing, you need to just build a lot more compute, like a lot bigger data centers.
mm.
And once you're at the point of building, data centers that cost $1 trillion, um, well, that is just like quite hard. Like, and it's going to take longer than building the data centers that, cost $1 billion. And moreover, doing training for long horizon tasks intrinsically takes longer because you only get like one data point of information after, depending on how you do it. Like at the worst case, you get one unit of reward only after 1 month of training for this, like, did you succeed at the month-long task? And
Yeah.
yeah, that kind of sucks. That slows things down too.
Mm, mm. Yeah. So yeah, obviously there's a couple of talks this weekend about kind of the risks from artificial intelligence, and yeah, different ways that that might be risky. But you've recently argued that the EA community should focus on this mission of making the transition to a post-AGI society go well. Um, could you just explain kind of what that means?
Sure. So the simplest thought is just, well, okay, suppose that um, alignment is fine. So where via like control mechanisms, via alignment work, perhaps via like trading with AIs and so on, but via whatever mechanisms, AI does not take over and humans stay in control. Even so, there's this huge number of challenges that we will have to face. So that includes like new weapons of mass destruction, so new engineered pathogens, but also like drone swarms. Imagine the skies being blacked out because of billions of locust-like um, uh, military AI drones. Like, there's some pretty dystopian images you can already start thinking of.
Mm.
Also, though, just from like a more powerful, like a radically more powerful industrial base, think of the nuclear stockpiles, but could be multiplied 1,000 times over. So that, yeah, very many sorts of disruptive technologies. A second category is the risk of concentration of human power as well,
Mhm,
where
mhm,
unfortunately I think that like aligned AI is intrinsically um, like quite structurally a technology that allows for a radically greater power concentration than we've actually ever seen in history. And so you could end up with, really single dictator, even single global dictator. You can Another set of things that I worry about and think we need to be thinking about is what rights AIs have themselves. So that
mhm.
could be welfare rights, so that AIs aren't feeling the equivalent of torture. It could be economic and political rights, though, as well. So perhaps AIs should get paid for their labor. Perhaps AIs should be able to contribute to the political process. Um, and then finally, I think there's just some big picture decisions that will need to get made that will affect the very long term kind of future of humanity. And one of them that I think the most about is governance of space, where, almost everything that exists is not on Earth, it's off-world. Advanced AI means we will, be able to harness that and will perhaps even quite soon after the development of AGI really start spreading into space. That's something that could go very well, could go very badly, depending on how it's handled. And I would like to avoid a circumstance where you've just got this first come, first served, Caesar's keepers
Mm.
scenario where whoever happens to be most powerful at the time just grabs all the resources from for themselves and then just kind of locks that in.
Yeah, yeah. So obviously these issues like all seem super important. But a lot of people right now are focused on these kind of first order risks from superintelligence. And so somebody actually in Swapcard has asked, like, given that survival is a prerequisite to flourishing, should we maybe be focusing just like solely on reducing existential risks before really thinking about any of this like flourishing better futures kind of stuff?
Yeah, great question. And I think there's two ways of understanding that. Um, the first is just like, well, um, you know, if we don't survive, then you're getting no value from increasing flourishing. Um, However, the response to that is, well, if we've got this kind of completely, valueless future, then there's no point in ensuring we survive either. So the argument actually goes kind of both ways there.
Mm, mm,
Like the value of the future is survival times flourishing, so you can increase that by working on either. The second is the thought that like maybe work on survival is just more urgent, and we can punt work on kind of flourishing till later on. Um, and I think that's like a good general consideration because often there are things we can punt. However, in a lot of cases, actually, the uh, issues relating to flourishing are more urgent, I think, than the issues relating to survival. So, for example, the risk from AI-enabled concentration of human power comes earlier, in my view, than risk of loss of control to AI
mm,
systems. Where here's the general thought is your ability to take over the world or take over the country is some fraction, some combination of like your capability at doing so and the resources you already have. And AIs will be starting off with essentially zero resources. However, humans can start off by being um, a head of state or among the richest people in the world and so on. And so, even with a lower capability of AI that wouldn't be able to take over itself, a pairing of extremely powerful human or humans plus that lower capability AI may well be able to.
Mm.
Um, and so I could go on more, but I talk about this in a later section of preparing for the intelligence explosion, where, yeah, try and give some like nuance and different ways in which actually many of these things like can be urgent, even if they like, and they can be urgent in terms of things to do, even if the payoff is after the point of AGI.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That makes sense. Yeah, speaking of AI-enabled concentration of power, there's another question from Swapcard. People are kind of curious what is the, what are the proposals for dealing with this that you're most optimistic about? And yeah, I'd also be curious, like, what other work do you think needs to be done in this space?
Okay, great. So there's loads of work that needs to be done. I mean, some of the things that I think are most important. One is getting kind of widespread agreement among AI companies um, with respect to AI character, what's called the model spec. So the description of this is how the AI should behave. Um, where, one thing you could do is just say, yep, well, what the AI does is just follow the instructions of its user. It just is obedient. It's like a calculator or pair of scissors or something. Um, that poses risks. That poses serious risks, I think, from concentration of power. Because if you've got some power-seeking human who is then asking the AI to kind of assist in its in their aims, well, then it will do so. And so instead, I think we want to have widespread agreement. I mean, ideally, this would all be regulation, but
Mm.
I think we're unlikely to get that. But at least widespread agreement and norms that no, instead, our like AIs obey the law, obey the relevant constitutions of any countries it's operating in, um, and will not take action to yeah, to undermine the rule of law to enable concentration of power. Perhaps more generally, you could think that when AI is working for the government, is like, being employed by a government, it is working for the interests of the people of the country. That's who it's aligned to, rather
Mm.
than the user at the time, which might be some particular politician. So that's kind of one path. Then there's some technical work that you can do, such as alignment audits. So checking for whether an AI model has been backdoored, so and has therefore secret loyalties. So this could come from within an AI company itself, or it could come from, a foreign actor, like a rival country like China, where via kind of data poisoning or manipulating training, you could have the AI such that like it behaves as it should in almost all cases, but at some point of time it like switches essentially, uh, will start acting in accordance with a different allegiance. Um, and there's ways you could like test for that. So you could have a red team that deliberately inserts such a loyalty and a blue team that sees if they can detect it or not. Then there's just kind of wider norms. So really getting people alert to the fact that AI can be used in this way, just as like in a kind of very public way. And then I think there's very many like minor actions that people can take. Um, then I think a couple of other things. One is like, worries around this does make me want more for AI to be developed by a democratic country rather than an authoritarian country. Because
Mm.
I think AI in an authoritarian country leads to even greater levels of authoritarianism than we have now. It also makes me favor AI being developed or AGI being developed by a coalition of democratic countries rather than just because if you just got one, then the risk that that one country slides into authoritarianism is quite high. If there are many democratic countries, they can be meaningful checks on each other.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so yeah, I know that yeah, a few of these things that you've mentioned kind of hinge on this idea of like regulation or buy-in from governments. And I'm curious, these issues like around like AI and the intelligence explosion can often sound like pretty sci-fi, pretty out there. How do we get like voters and politicians to care about these issues?
It's rough. I think it's pretty tough. So one one approach you could have is just think this is just going to be too hard while it's all kind of somewhat far away, and so just really focus on the AI companies because the AI companies themselves, like people there, really believe that they often have quite aggressive timelines. Like AGI is coming in the next few years. Uh, the other thing could be prepping in advance for major incidents. So political opinion and public opinion tends to be reactive. People were really quite in favor of nuclear power. Then there was like 3 Mile Island and then later Chernobyl and so on. And that just really switched public opinion. And with respect to AI, you could imagine, firstly, perhaps just no one even knows that there's been some like catastrophic incident because it doesn't necessarily get reported. And then secondly, if it does, people might not really understand like how big is a deal is this and so on. And so, yeah, you could instead, and then finally, maybe people make a big deal of it, but then do some dumb thing. Like the policy response is kind of bad. So I think on all three of these things, you can be tracking um, alignment failures, tracking catastrophes. Second, then like publicizing and broadcasting this when it's appropriate to do so. And then thirdly, having a suite of like, these are the policies we should have in place. Um, that's kind of the best plan in my view.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. Um, yeah, I want to shift theme a little bit. Somebody in Swapcard has asked a pretty interesting question about the impacts of AI on farmed animals. So obviously, farmed
Mhm.
animal welfare, massive issue in something that a lot of people in the EA community care about. But recently people have been arguing that there's a risk of increasing suffering of farmed animals through developments in AI. I'm curious if you've spent any time thinking about this or like how worried you are about this sort of thing.
Yeah, I think the honest answer is I know some people have been working on this and I really haven't engaged with it myself. I'll admit I am a little bit skeptical on how big a deal AI will be for farm animal welfare, where I expect even at the point of time that we get to kind of cognitive superintelligence, I'm not expecting radical changes in the world, like in the kind of regular economy, because these things like they're quite slow to diffuse. Um, People are like kind of often untrusting of new technology and so on. And already and then especially in like yeah, kind of agriculture, uh yeah, any like they've already really honed the efficiency of raising meat from chickens and so on.
Mm.
It's unclear to me like how big a difference would any of this would this make? In light of the already kind of exponential increase in suffering that we have. The thing that I'd maybe be more excited about is the positive use of AI for development of clean technology. So, like, if it is the case that we have this like huge abundance of uh, scientific and engineering labor, and you can just direct that in one way or another. Oh wow, well we could direct it towards socially beneficial things
Mm.
like really good meat alternatives, whether that's plant-based meat alternatives or in vitro meat. And I don't know, like, how promising will it be? Like, is that if this is the sort of thing where it's like actually you just need like a lot of kind of slow experiments, then AI helps less than in other areas. But I don't know. I'd be quite interested in that.
Yeah, yeah. Um, cool. Yeah. Another question coming from Swapcard. So I know there's been some conversation over the last couple of years about this idea of an AI bubble, and that this is bound to pop at some point, and this kind of means that the current hype and discussion we have around AI is maybe not well founded. But that also this bubble popping might have a pretty big impact on the global economy. I'm curious if you've thought about this issue, how that might affect kind of timelines and the future development of AI.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I want to distinguish first between a bubble and a bet. So a bubble is where the the valuation of companies have become totally divorced from their actual, like the kind of fundamental value. So the classic kind of Dutch tulip mania was an example of this, with, tulips being sold for £1 million and so on. And that's because it's like, oh, well, I'm going to buy it for so much because I think I can sell it for so much, not because I think it's actually worth that. I think the case for AI being a bubble in that sense is really quite weak, where revenues are like very high, growth rate in revenue is extremely high, and there's just like an really quite obvious argument for why like AI getting better, which again it's getting better like really quite predictably, would be worth an economically enormous amount. You could easily automate like some meaningful percentage of the world economy. Okay, even if that's 1%, that's like worth $1 trillion a year. It's an awful lot. Um, and in fact, I think that AI companies are currently undervalued because I think that valuations are not pricing in the idea that they will in fact get to AGI, that in fact there will be an intelligence explosion, where if you automate all cognitive labor, well, the value of that is at the very low bar would be like $30 trillion per year. But I think in fact would be much higher than that again. However, that is not to say that AI investment is not a bet, where a bet would be saying, okay, well, maybe there's a 50-50 chance of huge revenues or nothing. That can be a perfectly reasonable valuation, but still be the case that you've got this 50% chance of it not panning out at all. I think I wouldn't go as high as 50%. Maybe I'm at about uh yeah, I don't know, 20% or 25% that there'll be like a stock market downturn as a result of this, on the order of
Mm.
uh let's say 20%. Um if that happens, well, there's two, like, what's the effect on that on timeline and future of AGI? I mean, I think the bigger thing is that if that happens, that's good evidence that AI progress is actually kind of stalling out and is not that economically valuable. That would be like the bigger effect. And then there would be the causal effect. And so that would drive my timelines quite a bit further into the future. Then the causal effect of the stock market bubble popping, I don't know, at very most would be like a couple of years, but I don't think even that, maybe like 1 year or something. Whereas like the stock market grows like, you know, 10% per year, or more, in fact, on average. So even a 20% decline is like a couple of years. Um, Now, what is the actual effect that has on timelines if we got the evidence that things are kind of stalling out more? Actually, the effect could be quite big because we're at this unusual period where we're able to just scale up the fraction of compute that the world produces. Um, that's dedicated to AI computing. So TSMC, I actually don't know the latest numbers, but it's still the case that the majority of the chips it produces are for things like smartphones or cars and so on. They're not for like AI training runs or AI inference. And so we can scale that up relatively easy. But at the point of time that you've got to build new chip factories called fabs, oh man, that takes longer. That's like years. Unless it's just like so economically valuable that you can go very quickly. And so my best guess timelines are actually like heading toward, like, my best guess is in 50%, it's heading towards this kind of like knife edge period where if you don't get it by 2030, so man, it ends up being like
Mm.
potentially quite a bit longer because perhaps you're actually just having to grow the whole economy just to pay for like more chip for, just to pay for more chips to do more training runs and so on. And so in my own case, like I'm like, okay, going really all in on like short timelines, medium timelines, AI till 2030 is how I've put it in my own head. And at that point, we'll reassess. We're either like really on the cusp of, well, maybe it's already happened, but either
Mhm.
really on the cusp of transformative AI, or it's maybe going to be this slower process.
Mhm. Mhm. Wow. Okay. So I'm sure there's lots more to dive into there, but I think that's all we have time for right now in this session. So yeah, thank you everyone in the audience who's asked questions. Thank you for watching. We'll be moving over to Gather now for office hours in about 10 minutes. But thank you, Will, so much for chatting to me.
Well, yeah, thanks, Jordan, for the great questions, and thanks everybody for attending. This was a really fun back and forth.
Awesome. Cheers, everyone.